Hi, and welcome to sharing your content. So you have your content, or you might have your storyboard and your idea, but you could have the best film, but unless people see it, it might not have the impact that you want it to have. So in this section, we'll be thinking about how best to share your content, the kind of content that works for different platforms and the different uses, and how you can measure the impact of your content. So, firstly, when it comes to video content, it's really important that you choose the right platform. Now, all platforms are not made equally. Different content is used for different things, and there's a lot of platforms, but I wouldn't don't let yourself be overwhelmed by that. So, when it comes to social media, things like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, they're great for raising awareness of your work, increasing engagement and broader reach. And that's essentially, if you think about your own experience using social media, um, often people might be scrolling through Instagram or TikTok, um, or even Facebook, and you might come across content that you didn't know, or about an organization that you didn't know. Um, there's something that might capture you and encourage you to watch on. That's the kind of content that works really well for social media. So general awareness raising, it could be funny, it's good if it has a hook, something that's humorous, a good story, um, something that really makes people stop and interrupt their scrolling. But it doesn't necessarily have to be very long. For social media in particular, the best content is short and engaging, 30 seconds or less. It's good to have a story in that moment. Um, there is a slight shift to slightly longer form content on these platforms, but no more than a minute or two. YouTube is slightly different because you can have longer form videos on YouTube, but also YouTube Shorts. But essentially, if you're doing a video or content for social media, if it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube Shorts, it's best to keep it short, snappy, about awareness raising. Maybe you're teaching people to do something. So that's a style of content known as edutainment. Um, and that's, for example, like cookery videos or hacks, um, those kind or even things like Get Ready with Me, where you're teaching your audience something in a way that's fun and memorable and engaging, but can be quite short. So for example, if you run uh, a gardening center, you could teach people how to plant flowers or how to harvest um, seasonal vegetables, or you could do short book reviews, things that can engage a wider audience, but can also be quite fun. And then when it comes to content for your website or blog, these can be embedded directly for your audience, and they're best for ideal, more focused interactions. So, for example, if you have a video about the impact of your work, a, a longer case study, because it's also, once again, useful to think about who's on your website. Usually, these are people who might have more information about you. They might be familiar with your work. They might have come from a newsletter, for example, or they might have seen a post on social media and have been directed to your website, but they're not at the early awareness stage. They're slightly lower in your marketing funnel. So it's useful to think about them as people who would watch a longer video, who might have some additional context of your work. Um, and it's also good to be mindful of the fact that not all content will work in different on the same platforms, for example. So a short edutainment style video would work really well on TikTok, might not work so well on your website. Um, but as I said, longer form content works better on a website. And it's similar with email newsletters, for example. So people who subscribe to your audience, so people who subscribe to your newsletter are part of your audience. They like you usually. Um, they might have come across your work for a little while. They're closer to the end of the marketing funnel. Um, they are probably more interested in you and have some emotional connection already. They are warm audiences. Um, so this is the audience that you can create um, content that has high conversion potential. So, for example, if you were a charity creating fundraising videos, it's more likely that your fundraising videos will work better in your emails. Um, it could also be content about a case study if you're wanting people to come to an event, for example, or wanting them to know about the benefits of an event, and you send that content through your email newsletter, that's more likely to convert. Um, and also depending on the geographic reach of your work, whether it's across Greater Manchester, for example, or if it's more regionally specific, your email newsletters, if you can segment your list, can allow you to create content that's specifically targeted to those regions. To summarize, the right platform um, can really boost the ability of your content to be seen and to be seen in the right ways. So now we've thought about the platforms, it's useful to think about how to share your content. So you can create, as I mentioned before, for things like TikTok, teasers or short clips. Um, these can also be really helpful if you're launching something. So whether it's a new service or you have an event, you can create like a short show reel for that. And then put that on your social media as a teaser. Using hashtags is great um, across all of your social media platforms. And this, as we know, increases searchability and discoverability. So there's lots of trending hashtags. Depending on the nature of your content, we would advocate that you use as many of those as you're comfortable doing. And also, if you're working with an organization or if you're working with someone, in addition to using hashtags, it's good if you tag them because it increases reach. Ask people to share your content where relevant, because that once again increases if if you ask people to share your content or you tag them, then that's your audience plus their audience plus the audience of the people who like, share, and comment on your work. So the more you can have that, the more organic interaction that you can have on your content, it's very good. And video content usually does perform better than visual content or just text content. So you have that on your side before you even get started. And then post at peak times, which may seem obvious, but there are different platforms have peak times depending on when people use them and how. So it could be whether people are scrolling, for example, on Instagram when they're commuting. It could be people who are scrolling on their phones before bed. So use what you know about how people interact with your content and how people interact with your platforms and optimize when you share your content based on that. Um, and then have a call to action. So encourage people to like or share, comment. One thing that you could do if you're sharing content from your company page or your organization's page for the first time is share it and then send a link to the people that work in your organization, volunteers, maybe people who have interacted with your service before, and ask them to like and comment and share the video because that also tricks the algorithm into thinking that people like this content. And more, and it will show it to more and more people. And if you do that in the first kind of like couple of minutes, then you're likely to increase your engagement. And then once you've done that, it's always good to measure the impact of your work. And there's lots of ways to do this. It's good when you start sharing your content, if you have time to maybe put together an Excel spreadsheet of different pieces of content so you can track which ones have performed better and then use that to create content later. But your view count indicates how many times your video has been watched. That's quite an easy thing to track, for example, if you post it on YouTube, but also social media platforms have this natively within them. Engagements, as I said before, so people who like, share, comment, and directly interact with your video, the more engagement you have is the more people that your content will get to. And that will increase your view count. Watch time is quite interesting. For a longer piece of content, for example, it could be that people watch the whole thing, in which case you know that you've held their attention for a long period of time. It could be that they only watch the first 20, maybe 20 or 30 seconds of it if it's a 1 minute video. And then you know that for next time you should tailor your content because it might not have been as engaging as you wanted it to be, or there might have been something um, that didn't necessarily resonate with your audiences. So that's a really interesting way to track how people interact with your content. And then click-through rates. So, for example, if you're doing a piece of content for fundraising, do you know, do you have a sense of how many people have clicked through and donated, for example? Or if you're promoting a particular service, and you have a call to action to get to that service, tracking the number of people who use that link. And it could be, if you want to be a bit more specific with how you test, it could be that you track that with a video and compare it to that with an image, or that with just text, because then you know if it's the content, if it's the written content or the video content that's inspiring the action. But that's a good way to see. Um, and then audience demographics. So lots of platforms, your website even will have, if you have Google Analytics, will have some demographic information within it. So it could be that you're able to see based on the demographic data, whether people from a particular city are engaging with your content, if it's people engaging at a particular time, because that will also help in terms of when you would share your content. Um, so use as much of that data as possible in order to create meaningful content for you and measure its impact. So now you have all of that. You know what content each platform is going to work for each platform. You know how to share that content. You know how to measure its impact. It's also really useful to think about how you're going to store and organize your content. Um, this is a problem that lots of organizations have. So it's cloud storage is a great option because obviously videos can take up a lot of space on your phone, on your computer. So if you put them in the cloud, that's quite beneficial in terms of freeing up space. You can also have external hard drives. Um, these are very good for high volume. So if you've got lots of pictures, for example, lots of video, you can put them in an external hard drive, and it's good for offline access. And then in terms of organizing, it could be that you have video content for a specific project, date specific, or content types. But before you start creating content or lots of content, think about how you're going to structure it. Maybe write a document for your colleagues so you all know what the content is labeled and where you should save it so you have a knowledge management system. That will be really helpful in terms of retrieving content. And it'll also be helpful, for example, if you get to a point where you feel more confident with things like editing, for you to reuse your content. And then security. If it's sensitive content, treat it in the same way that you would treat your other data under GDPR. Use passwords, encryption, particularly around sensitive content. Make sure you have all of your consent forms stored in the same place or in a similar place that's easy to access. So when people access your content, they know where you have consent for that content to be shared. And then finally, key takeaways. Um, it's really important to share your videos on platforms that are suited to your audience. As I mentioned, maximize engagement through strategic posting and calls to action. Measure the impact of your content using metrics like views and engagement, and store your content securely and organize it for easy access. Thanks so much for listening, and good luck with your content.